Yeah, I'm an anthropologist, and that sounds like the start of a confession of some kind, I know. And it probably should be a confession because most anthropologists, or when you say you're an anthropologist, people immediately know that you study some sort of other people, some kind of exotic people. I'm an anthropologist who studies us. I study Silicon Valley. I have studied in North America my entire career because I thought we were a pretty exotic group of people. And one of the things that I'm most interested in is how people use their time. That simple. We're born, we're on the planet. What do we do with the time that we have here? A lot of it is choices that people make. Sometimes it's not choices. Sometimes people are doing things that they didn't choose to do. And as a result of my interest in this, I started studying busyness about 15 years ago. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the background to studying busyness and where it takes me today. It is a little different kind of talk for an anthropologist because I'm studying us, in other words. And so when I would go and do field work, I was doing field work myself in some ways because the people that I studied were living the same kind of lives that I could imagine living. But let's give you the anthropological start here, okay? So first of all, let's imagine that we're going back to ancient times. We're going back to Egypt. And they're in the process of building pyramids. Everyone visualizes that. There's a pyramid going up. This is like a nova. The pyramid is slowly going up. It's rising. And if you looked at the people carrying those blocks up and putting them up there, you probably would not say, yeah, they're busy. Take a galley slave. Imagine an old Hollywood movie about, you know, galleys, and there's all these people in there and they're pulling on these oars. You probably wouldn't say, yep, they're busy. You might say they're really working hard. And often we kind of confuse busyness with working hard, but they're slightly different things. If you went back a little more recently, went back to colonial times, and you tried to find out what the men were doing, a safe bet would be, depending on the part of the country, the first 3 months or so of the year they were chopping wood. And that's all they were doing because that's what you needed to do to have enough fuel to heat your house for the winter. If you were a female, if you were a teenage girl, you would probably be spinning. And you would probably be spinning for the first 3+ months of the year, just so that the family could have the very basic clothes that they needed. Okay, now let's switch ahead to busyness, and we'll go to Santa Clara. And don't try to guess who I'm talking about, because these are all pseudonyms. So we're going to meet Suzanne. And Suzanne is coming out of the house with her 2 daughters. And here's the way she comes out of the house, with her daughters, one on each hand. Of course, I was next to her. And she said, Umberto really gets bugged when I do this. Umberto was her husband. And Umberto believes that it's a fast-paced world and you should move pretty quickly in it. And you got to prepare your kids for that kind of world. And Suzanne says you got to teach your kids to push back and to define the spaces in their lives so they know that they're in control of their life. So she deliberately walked them slowly so that they would learn how to control time around themselves. Umberto and Suzanne had conversations about religion. One of the functions of religion to them, they went to church every Sunday, and one of the functions of religion for them was that it taught you that there's a time and a place for everything. You learned the rituals in the church service, and there was very little talk about the spirituality of it, but there was a lot of talk about time and the proper gestures, the proper movements that you made, and you were getting lessons about the proper use of time. I was doing a project with this family. They were one of about 14 families that a group of colleagues and I studied, and we studied them for a year. So I went to school with their kids. I went to work with them. We went on vacations, Easter egg hunts, shopping, errands, you name it. We were the odd people who accompanied them. As one person in the study joked, many families in Silicon Valley have a psychotherapist. We have an anthropologist. And that was kind of the trump. So I would be with Suzanne, and what was interesting to me when I was with her at work was kind of the non-work stuff she was doing, because we were interested in how people juggled family and work commitments. So she would be working as a marketer. She was a job-sharing worker in a high-tech company, and she would be sitting there working at the computer, and all of a sudden there would be something on the screen that I would go, where did that come from? And I said, what's that? She said, well, Umberto just has been going over some of my investments from my 5 previous employers, and he's thinking we ought to reallocate some of it, and so he just sent it to me. And so I'm working on that. Now, notice the difference when you see people carrying large chunks of stone up to the top of the pyramids, you kind of know they're working really hard. Now, when you see Suzanne sitting there at the computer working, it's almost like she's not working. But the longer you stay, what you see is that people are doing some really fascinating code switching, is what I would think of it as. And all of a sudden, she shifted from marketing, boom, something arrived from her husband. It's a completely different set of rules that she's following. The analogy that I would use, and this dates me horribly, but I can see enough people here who will understand what I'm talking about. Imagine you are hurtling down a highway in Nevada, and you come to a line of Burma shave signs. Okay, that's the dating. Burma shave signs were signs with clever little phrases on them that I think were put in the ground every quarter mile or so. And you can be driving very, very fast in a place like Nevada and probably not know how fast you're going unless you look at the speedometer. Then you go by those Burma shave signs and you go boom, 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 and you go, wow, I'm going really, really fast. One of the characteristics of busyness, I think, is this quality not just of kind of absolute speed, but of the kind of punctuation that you have in your daily life. People are encountering different kinds of things instantaneously. So I would sit next to people who were emailing, and I would debrief them as they emailed, and they would shift from one kind of emailing that you did with the person literally in the next cube. And yes, you did email that person. The person in Australia who maybe you didn't know, your boss, your family member, other family members, and you are literally code switching. Every one of those things is a little bit different, and every one of those transactions is work. This is a project that when we started off studying work and family, and we specifically were studying how those commitments got put together by people. And it was really fascinating. This was about 15 years ago. And people had a common set of gestures for it. And they would say, and the mic goes down now, or goes out, well, you know, it's really difficult to balance. Okay. Now I could really scare them. The other metaphor besides balancing was juggling. Balancing and juggling. And what was really funny was that after a while, when you talk to people, you realize balancing and juggling kind of assumed fixed balls that you were throwing up in the air or weights that you were balancing. But the things that people built their lives out of seemed to be a lot more slippery than that. And so we started talking more about busyness because what people were filling their lives with was much more than work and family. Consumption was a huge part of what people were doing, a huge part. Recreation was a huge part of what people were doing. And so after the year or so that we were with people, we focused more on this question of busyness and how people navigated all of this, because there were still other things that were going on. One of the metaphors that we heard people talking about was, you know, life is speeding up. And everyone nods their head when you say that. And then when I'd say, but I don't know, I don't see things moving faster. You know, people are still walking. What is the it that's speeding up in all of this? Well, people would talk an awful lot about what was speeding up all around them, but what we noticed was that the speeding up, largely made possible by the technology, only allowed people to cram more things in the same period of time. And so that was what was given the illusion of life speeding up. But things weren't necessarily moving that much faster. As a result of this, what we were finding was a new kind of work that nobody talked about. So when we asked people to describe their days, they would talk an older language, but it was almost as if the language had not caught up with the reality of the everyday life. Suzanne volunteered to do the department newsletter at her company. Why did she do that? Because she was a job sharer, and it gave her a legitimate reason to go around and query other people, coworkers, about what was up, what was going on. And as she said, you're always kind of like the CIA. You're always intelligence gathering about what information might matter to you sometime in the future. Another father said, family dinners are very important. That's the best place to catch up on something that's going to slam me a week or 2 or 3 down the line. Because people start talking about what kind of commitments, the science fair that's coming up, whatever it is that I have to do. So what we found, first of all, was that there was a new kind of work that people were doing, and many people spoke of their lives not as lives lived, but as lives managed. And they said, we're here because we manage life. And that led to another interesting thing that was going on, was a kind of recontextualizing or changing the building blocks of everyday life. People did multiple things. The father who coordinated the neighborhood Christmas tree drive said he did it because he loved the Christmas trees, but it also indebted all of the neighbors so that if he needed a place to park his kid after school, they were pretty sure to say, okay, someone would help out. The number of people who would say that they found very useful corporate trainings in time management. Suzanne and Umberto, by the way, had a mission statement on their refrigerator that had come from Stephen Covey's school of thinking. And they constantly took things. Umberto had been through, he was a fireman. He'd been through training in fire suppression, obviously. And there was a system that firefighters were trained in about how to do this. He used it to organize all his home repair projects. And as he said, I also use it to organize my wife. Okay, there's an interesting kind of breaking down, in other words, of familiar categories. And this is really interesting to an anthropologist because we absolutely love big cultural transitions of some kind. And I would put to you that we're in the middle of a massive cultural transformation of some kind, where we're still speaking a language of older categories that are familiar to us, but you look at what we do with some of these things, and we're doing very, very different things. Gantt charting to organize projects at work. We spotted one Gantt chart next to, taped up on the wall of the kitchen the day after Thanksgiving because it was convenient to organize the cooking of the turkey. This is kind of the movement of things from work to family and back again. Now, all of this is going on. The other big lesson that I think we learned was the amount of experimentation itself that was going on. People had attitudes. They were constantly experimenting on their daily lives. What will work? What will give us some respite of some kind? Where do we want to create pockets of tranquility? Where are we willing to have things speed up? And the really cool thing was because we studied these people for a year, we went back and we would revisit them even in the years after that, and you saw that things changed so that everyone could give you a compelling story about their lives at this moment and why it was being lived the way it was lived, but it was nothing more than an experiment. And you would go back 6 weeks later and you would find that people had completely flip-flopped relationships because of fights, for example, of who got the quality time with the kids at what time of day. And people would change the hours that they worked. They would change the devices that they had purchased. There was constant experimentation going on. It's now 15 years later. When we wrapped up this study, a number of people said, I think it's kind of dead. I think it's over. I think the busyness problems are all fixed. And what was really interesting is people pointed to the technology. They said, you know, it's all going to be just a moot point because everyone's going to carry around Palm Pilots and everyone's going to be just really, really organized, and we'll get really, really organized. Every family that we talk with dreamt of the ultimate platform of organization that was going to buy people the time that they wanted. What did all the people who saved the time do with it? Worked. They worked more. And the very devices to make people more efficient were the same devices that in the long term seem to have allowed them to pack more and more and more in. The other big change that's occurred in the last few years that to me is really fascinating is the way that the technology itself, which most of the families we studied had more to do with managing people's daily activities, has more recently become much more constitutive of daily life and daily activities. Remember, everything that I'm talking about was before Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. It was before really the rise of gaming. And increasingly, you find more and more the technology is involved, not just in managing the busyness, but it's also literally involved in creating new activities, which brings me to a kind of a close here, not a really big, gigantic close, because as an anthropologist, I try desperately not to judge these things. You know, we just point stuff out. We're kind of annoying that way. We just point stuff out, and then people say, but what do we do? And we say, well, the first thing is awareness of what's going on. What's going on that's really fascinating is that there's more talk today about the costs of being busy than there has ever been. And people are obsessed with that question of what are the costs to communities, to individuals, to families, to lives, etc. And yet it has corresponded with the rise of more and more use of technology to make us even busier. There's a fascinating quality to some of this, of many of the people that I've talked to, who almost want to, and this, maybe this doesn't resonate with you, but it does with me. It's almost like they want to extend their life. People talk the language of life extension, that I might not be doing the right thing, because most of us don't know what the right thing is to do in today's world, because a lot of older norms have broken down. But if you just do enough stuff, you'll probably, if you have a batting average of 250, it'll probably be a pretty good life. So to me, the final word that's what fascinates me about this is what I saw in actually spending time with people was kind of a fascinating discourse about mastery of technology, of devices, of organization. The most exotic thing I've ever seen as an anthropologist was 3 women in the driveway coordinating summer drama schools for their children and the carpooling connected with that and how they would stay in touch with all of this. More exotic than any kinship diagram I've ever seen from any other society. This kind of work then is going on, and the interesting thing to me is that an older kind of work, and I mean it in literally the kind of work we do on ourselves, is about building meaningful lives. There's a large literature on that importance of creating narratives for ourselves and about ourselves and stringing all these pieces together. To me, that's the grand experiment that we're doing. How are we going to string the pieces together when we literally don't have time to do it? And what will be the consequences in the future? The only thing I know for sure is that individuals are right now trying to solve this in very, very different ways. Ways from letting more activities into their lives to Umberto and Suzanne with their mission statement, who said, before we even let anybody into our house, we hold them up against the mission statement and we ask, where do they fit in order to control the busyness? Thanks.